Welcome to the Calm Analysts channel. This is Boris Tizengauzen with you. Today is August 19th. There are a lot of important news stories in this episode. A black day for fans of Putin, Orban and Fico. And the Kremlin has sharply changed its rhetoric after the meeting between Zelensky and Trump. It turns out they didn't need Ukrainian territories, but what they did need, we'll talk about that. The main outcomes of the meeting in the US between Zelensky, Trump and European leaders. Ukraine will receive security guarantees. And soon Zelensky and Putin are expected to meet in person. Is there really a chance for peace now, or is someone just trying to buy more time again? That's what we'll be talking about, and much more in today's episode. There's a lot of interesting stuff ahead. So, if you're new to this channel, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the upcoming episodes. So the black day has come for Orban and Fico. There has been a complete halt in oil pumping through the Druzhba pipeline. One of the key elements of the Druzhba pipeline has been put out of commission. We're talking about the Nikolskoye oil pumping station. That's in the Tambov region. It was destroyed by Ukrainian drones. Well, that's how it turned out. So, to emphasize, the oil pumping has been completely stopped. And no one knows when it will be fixed. Well, the Druzhba pipeline is shut down, and if there's no Druzhba friendship, then there's no pipeline. It's all perfectly logical. I'm predicting that now the ministers of Slovakia and Hungary will come out and say, this is an attack on energy sovereignty, on energy independence. That's how it goes, especially when there's a war going on. So there's no point in buying Russian gas and oil. At a very inconvenient and unexpected moment, they can simply stop. But let me emphasize again, the best sanctions are sanctions of this kind. By the way, Putin gave a very funny response to Donald Trump about that B-2 Spirit bomber that flew over him in Alaska. Well, over him or not over him, it's unclear. Over that replicant or whatever it was, running around there accompanied by B-2 Spirit fighters, and it was unexpected. And Putin decided to respond, but he did so in the only way he could. Well, I'll get to that now, how he responded. But right now, I want to tell you a simple thing. Over there in the Kremlin, they're fascist thugs. They always live by their KGB playbooks. Did any of you really doubt that on the day of important negotiations between Ukraine and the United States, Putin wouldn't strike Ukraine? Did anyone really have any doubts that he wouldn't do it? I think everyone understood that it's always been this way. Whenever there's an important moment, Putin tries to show his strength. Well, at least that's what he thinks. And in this case, it's exactly the same. They never step out of this pattern. So he struck Kremenchuk, used cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, drones. In other words, he even deployed strategic aviation. We'll talk about that now. It was precisely with his strategic aviation that Putin responded to Trump and the B-2 Spirit. A couple of days ago, right after Putin's trip to Alaska over the Barents Sea, Putin scrambled those very same modified Tu-95MS bombers. He decided to show that he too can deploy strategic aviation in neutral airspace. Those bombers flew through. So Putin decided to show, you have the B-2 Spirit? Well, I'll show you something too. Look, the Tu-95MS are flying. Let me remind you, the Tu-95s have been his since Soviet times. Some of them, by the way, were received from Ukraine in exchange for security guarantees. This was part of, including the nuclear arsenal aircraft that launch missiles capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. Now, these planes take off and launch cruise missiles at Ukraine. Or, for example, they fly over the Barents Sea, supposedly to intimidate someone there. I don't know who. Are they planning to scare the United States with this junk? Seriously? So yes, we gave up our planes. Some were scrapped, and some were taken by Russia in exchange for security guarantees. Well, I think everyone understands perfectly well how that turned out. But if you compare the B-2 Spirit and the Tu-95, they're just completely different worlds. But there's nothing to do it with. Putin doesn't have any state-of-the-art stealth bombers. Of course not. Just a reminder, the Tu-95 was designed in the 1950s. Yes, this MS version is a modernized one, but the B-2 is the world's only serially produced strategic stealth bomber. So it still remains a unique development to this day, even though the project started back in the 1980s. And then there's the show of force. What do you think? It's just like in that joke, right? Let's bathe the horse in champagne. We don't have that kind of money, hussars. No? Well, then let's at least pour some beer over the cat. So this was pretty much the same kind of response. By flying the B-2 over, The US showed that they can secretly reach anywhere, including delivering a nuclear or a high-precision non-nuclear strike. So the main feature of the B-2 is its stealth. That's why they showed it to Putin. It was a demonstration. I don't agree that it was some kind of parade. I think it was more of a demonstration of capabilities, although maybe it was a bit of both. Who knows? Well, the Tu-95 over the Barents Sea, that's for domestic consumption. An echo of the USSR. I mean, this Tu-95 is perfectly visible on radar. When it takes off, it's detected right away, and so on. It's not a threat, but a demonstration that Russia possibly still has nuclear missiles. And we're reminding you that we have them. That's how it is. So you get the idea, right? A response, a demonstration and a response from two different worlds. Well, what else could it have been? Although, let me emphasize again, this kind of response to some show of force makes Putin predictable. A strike during important negotiations makes him predictor. I mean, they always act this way. By the way, friends, let me remind you, we have an important fundraiser, and right now the front is holding thanks to the heroism of our soldiers. And our soldiers are holding on thanks to our medics. This fundraiser is for the 1st Medical Battalion, for the 1st Medbat. We are raising money for the most essential evacuation vehicles, drone ambulances. They're called MAUL. It's an armored capsule on wheels. The wheels are also special, well, special airless ones, so they can't be punctured. The capsule can withstand hits, bullets, and shrapnel. It's been thoroughly tested. So how does it work? In places where it's difficult to evacuate a wounded soldier, this drone arrives. Our own troops place the wounded inside, secure them, close the armored capsule, and then, at speed or off-road, because the MAUL can handle some really serious obstacles, it transports them out. It transports them to a safe location where medics receive our soldier and save their life. It's an extremely, extremely important and awesome thing. In other words, this is an investment in saving the lives of our heroes, our defenders. So let's help our medics. And in fact, every donation is an investment in saving the lives of our fighters. So I ask you to support this fundraiser. The link is in the description of this video and in the comments to this video. There's mono, there's private, and there's PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. And here's what the MAUL looks like. A message from one of the fighters of the 1st Medical Battalion to us, to you.
Evacuating the wounded is one of the most difficult challenges on the front today. Together with Boris Tizengauzen's channel, exactly, that's precisely the point I was trying to make. Your understanding of the situation is absolutely spot on and perfectly aligns with my own thoughts on the matter.
So, let's help our medics. And if you're not watching on my channel, you might not see the payment details, but you will definitely see this QR code. It leads directly to the fundraising account, and I always sincerely thank you from the bottom of my heart for helping Ukraine and its defenders. And our soldiers are always grateful as well. And I think it's hard for us to even convey to them how much we appreciate them. Now, on to the main topic. Putin has agreed to meet with Zelensky in the next 2 weeks. Merz said this. So, essentially, we're coming right up to that 50-day deadline that Trump gave Putin. Whether this was planned or just a coincidence is hard to say. However, Putin was given 50 days for the offensive, but he didn't get sanctions relief during this window. And Trump really did appear tougher, more rigid, shortening the ultimatum by 10 days, but he didn't impose sanctions. Instead, he imposed a 25% tariff on India. However, there are still some positive developments. The Kremlin, at least in its rhetoric, has toned down its fascist ambitions from 4 regions and Crimea to 2 full regions, and then along the front line, part of Kherson, Zaporizhzhia region, and Crimea. It's possible they'll tone it down even further, because Ukraine has already responded that there will be no troop withdrawal from Donbass, as Putin demands. Basically, Zelensky shared all the most important information at the briefing. There was a lot of interesting and new information there. It was a long conversation, very detailed. There were many things I couldn't even show on the map to my American colleagues regarding the situation on the battlefield, Zelensky said. By the way, using maps is a really good idea. It shows the scale, and you can clearly demonstrate how much territory Putin has occupied over the past year, for example. So, for instance, you can visually debunk Putin's fairy tales that he told Trump, like, I'll capture everything by the end of the year, all of Donbass, all of Ukraine, and so on. Donald Trump probably doesn't process things well by ear, especially percentages. So when you show him, here's how much he actually took, and here's how much he claims he'll take, it becomes clear. Well, then everything is obvious. As for the rest, I can't share all the details yet about security guarantees and how it will all work. But the most important thing is that there is already political will and a decision. Security guarantees must be formalized on paper within 10 days, Zelensky stated. Now, this is where it gets most interesting. Any agreement with Putin, we've already talked about this, what is it really worth? Putin has lied his entire life and continues to lie. And coming up with a reason to break an agreement is the easiest thing in the world for him. Well, some Russians dressed in Ukrainian uniforms could cross the border and shoot their own people in the Kursk region. That's it. Putin isn't attacking, Putin is defending himself. We've seen all this before. And once again, war, that's why real security guarantees are important. The whole story about Article 5 when Ukraine isn't in NATO is complete nonsense, excuse my French. In yesterday's episode, I mentioned that even within NATO, they're not sure if they'll actually invoke Article 5 themselves. Or rather, they will invoke it, but how exactly? Will they actually come to each other's aid if Putin attacks one of the alliance members? No one knows, no one has ever tested this in a real combat situation. So what can we even say about those who are outside the alliance? And that's why all of this is pretty questionable. But there was a previous version that was more workable, and they discussed a mechanism where if Putin attacks, Ukraine would automatically become a NATO member. There was such a version, and it was, well, more precisely, it was a workable version and it was discussed. But how to actually implement it procedurally, I have no idea. All the countries would have to vote to admit Ukraine into the alliance. And what will Hungary say about that? And others might have second thoughts too. So when it comes to guarantees, that's the most important thing. But the fact that they will be formalized within 10 days at least gives us a chance to see how real they actually are. Trump will help with an all-for-all exchange. Not just military personnel, but also civilians, journalists, and political prisoners. That's the right approach. And well, I believe that we give away bio-waste and get back the best people. Heroes, warriors, political prisoners. So I think an all-for-all exchange, yes, absolutely. Trump got in touch, Zelensky says, after our meeting with the Russian side. They discussed diplomatic steps. And Russia proposed first a bilateral meeting and then a trilateral one. We are ready for any format at the level of leaders. Not at the level of this, let's say, circus led by Lavrov, but at the level of leaders. That's one. Next, you just met with Trump in Alaska, Putin. So it looks like you'll have to meet with Trump again, and then there will be a trilateral meeting. Well, if Merz says that Zelensky will meet within 2 weeks, there isn't much time left to wait. And regarding the meeting at the leaders' level, it's important that it should happen without any preconditions. Putin will do everything possible to avoid meeting with Zelensky. I've said this many times already. If that happens, the narrative that Putin and Trump decided the fate of the world will fall apart. And a meeting with Zelensky automatically undermines one of the key theses of Russian propaganda. That he is illegitimate, expired, that you can't negotiate with him, and so on. In other words, Putin wouldn't meet with someone illegitimate. Isn't that right? So you see how it all works. That's why literally a month ago, Peskov put forward this new Russian version. Yes, we're ready, but first the meeting needs to be prepared. Certain conditions must be met. We've all heard this before. They don't specify the conditions, and when there's no clarity, you don't even know what to prepare for. That's why here they're proposing to meet without any conditions, so there's no way to back out anymore. And that's the story. I believe the preparation for this meeting was at a high level. Maps, visualizations, texts. Plus, European leaders were also preparing Volodymyr Zelensky for this meeting. So here's an interesting point about the maps in the Oval Office. The United States side prepared their own map, and Zelensky says, I even argued a bit about the percentage of controlled territories shown on the map, because I know very well the percentages of temporarily occupied areas. Nevertheless, there were no disagreements. It was truly a warm, good, and substantive conversation. Why was this extremely important? Because the visualization there was accurate. We brought our own maps, and let me remind you, Deep State prepared these maps. In 1,000 days, Russia occupied 1% of Ukraine's territory. Essentially, in 3 years, just 1%. Putin told Trump that he was confident he would achieve success by the end of the year. Maybe not by the end, maybe even by the end of summer. So, against the backdrop of this data, when you say that the Russian Federation captured 1% in 1,000 days, then why issue this ultimatum about 50 days? You see, it becomes meaningless if you say, well, here's the real truth, right? 1%. Everything that was occupied before that, Donbas, Crimea. So during the period of active hostilities after the full-scale invasion, 1%. There you have the data. And of course, Trump sits down and thinks, what is this bald guy from the Kremlin babbling to me about saying he'll capture all of Ukraine? You've captured 1% in 3 years. Something here just doesn't, well, I don't think Trump was actually thinking like that. But at the very least, this visualization allows you to present that kind of message. That's why, as Zelensky says, the issue of territories is something we'll leave between me and Putin, and that's something Putin absolutely didn't want, absolutely not. So Putin declares, give me back all of Donbas, get out of here. And in response, you want to even start discussing any territories? Let's meet. You see? But Putin doesn't want to meet, so what do? No one told him that anyone was going to trade Donbas, or not Donbas. He was told, let's meet and sort everything out. In general, there are a lot of unpleasant moments for the Russian Federation. Yes, of course, we would have liked it differently, for them to hit with sanctions right away as soon as they were mentioned, and now everything there would be falling apart at the seams. But at the very least, I want to tell you, this meeting went well, and even Merz said that it went better than he expected. Merz also noted that Trump reacted emotionally to stories about the fate of families in Ukraine. 5 hours. That's why I believe this was an extremely important meeting, and about the person who probably played one of the key roles in it. I'm talking about the president of Finland, Alexander Stubb. He actually has a kind of unique access to Donald Trump. Why? Let's talk about that now. And why Finland specifically? I think the history of Finland will play a key role in ending this war. During the closed-door meeting of leaders, the president of Finland, Alexander Stubb, called Kramatorsk and Sloviansk a bastion against the Huns. And according to Financial Times sources, this description impressed Donald Trump. In other words, he knows how. He knows how to present things figuratively, how to make the right analogy. By the way, the idea to invite Stubb, I think there was some replacement that happened there. It was supposed to be Poland instead of Finland, but that's how it turned out. But this is extremely, well, actually, they could have invited both, but Stubb was important at this meeting. You know, I think that besides being excellent at playing golf and knowing when and to whom he should lose, he also managed to find the key to Donald Trump. I saw several photos from that meeting, and Trump, looking past several European leaders, is searching for eye contact, seeking some kind of support from Alexander Stubb, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Let me remind you, Alexander Stubb is a prize winner. He plays golf brilliantly. I think he's much better at it than Donald Trump. But I get the feeling he might have let himself lose. And you know, losing to someone with a narcissistic personality type, that's really something. That's quite a move. And that's something you need to be aware of. By the way, there was a recent video showing Donald Trump, let's say, cheating a little bit at golf. So the golf cart stops, his, what's the right word, maybe caddy, the one who carries the bag, or his assistant gets out and tosses the ball to a different spot. So Trump's ball flew off somewhere, but then it was suddenly tossed closer. And this isn't the first time that people who've played golf with Donald Trump have said that he cheats a little. He's got such a narcissistic personality. Winning at any cost, even if it means breaking the rules, especially if it means breaking the rules. In other words, break all the rules if they get in the way of reaching your goal. And by the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because recently my good friend from Australia wrote to me and said that he noticed after watching Calm Analysis, his hair became soft and silky. By the way, my friend is helping our armed forces from Australia, and that's actually how we met. So make sure to subscribe to the channel. And one more important point. Why will Finland, or rather the history of Finland, play a key role here? Because first, Stubb knows how to explain to Donald Trump and especially to Volodymyr Zelensky and show them through the example of his own country's history that Finland went through a very similar experience and not only preserved its statehood but also became one of the most developed countries. And according to the happiness index, Finns are ranked number 1. Well, and those pieces of territory that the Soviet Union bit off after the Winter War actually became depressed regions of the Russian Federation. In general, it is precisely the Finnish model, or perhaps more correctly, the Finland model, that, hypothetically, could be negotiated with Moscow. That is, Finland managed to preserve itself as a country both before and after the end of World War II. The Finnish nation preserved itself as a nation. However, there was an intent to destroy them completely, but they were forced to lose about 11% of their territory, including part of Karelia with the northern shore of Lake Ladoga. So, in general, they lost territories in the east and the islands in the Gulf of Finland, unfortunately. And by the way, Moscow also seized the northern district of Petsamo. Now it's called Pechenga and belongs to Russia. And Finland leased its territory and waters for 50 years to create a Soviet military base. Doesn't that remind you of anything? And that's not even all. The size and composition of the country's armed forces were also restricted, and Finland was forbidden to have nuclear weapons, submarines, or bombers. And after all that, a year later, a treaty of friendship and mutual assistance was signed between the Soviet Union and Finland, which established Finland's neutral status, a status that lasted until 2023, when Finland joined NATO. So in fact, Putin did everything to ensure that Finland, which after the Soviet Union seized part of its territory, eventually joined NATO, and Sweden too for that matter. That's why Stubb needs to use Finland as an example to show that yes, it is possible to lose part of your territory. And I want to emphasize, I am almost certain that after this war, Russia in its current form simply will not survive. You can lose part of your territory, but still preserve your country, maintain your statehood, keep your nation, become even stronger, become even more successful, and ultimately end up in the alliance. Basically, that's it. As they say, I'm out of the game. Let me emphasize once again, when I say lose, I mean that the territories currently occupied by the Russian Federation's troops are only temporarily occupied. Sooner or later, we will reclaim our territories and also restore historical justice. We also have claims to a number of other territories that for now are considered part of the Russian Federation. And you, friends, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Subscribe to the channel and let's support our medics, the 1st Medical Battalion. Let's help with stretchers and evacuation vehicles for our soldiers, which will truly help save more than one life. Wishing us all a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.